Ethiopia says it will fill Grand Renaissance Dam within 7 years. Senegal has a new rape law, but is it too late for victims? And President Xi Jinping begins an historic state visit to Myanmar. Hello and welcome to Africa Live, only on CGTN. I'm Karen Roberts, live in Nairobi. Uche Okoronkwo joins me now with all your business headlines.
Thank you, Karen. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. Kenya now opts for World Bank funding to plug its budget deficit. And South Africa's Treasury struggles to find the $140 million to rescue the national carrier. Of course, more on that coming up within the program. For now, back to you, Karen.
Thank you very much, Uche. We begin with Ethiopia, where ministers have said the country will fill up its Grand Renaissance Dam over a period of 4 to 7 years. That's according to state-linked broadcaster. It's less than half the time proposed by Egypt, which has maintained a preferred timeline of 10 to 21 years. Cairo fears that filling the dam too quickly could cut its water supply from the Nile River. Over 90% of Egypt's fresh water comes from this single source. The United States has been mediating this dispute over Africa's largest hydropower project. A preliminary agreement was reached earlier this week in Washington between Ethiopia, Egypt and Sudan. The deal indicates that all three parties agree the giant dam will be filled in stages during the rainy season. Ethiopian ministers say the filling process will start by the end of this year.
What is our agreement here in Washington, D.C.? Technically, in the process of filling the dam, we agreed for Ethiopia to follow a rapid method to quickly fill the dam in the first 2 years. And after the first 2 years, while we are generating power, we have agreed to consider a way of serving a mutually benefiting strategy of operation. If and when a heavy drought comes by then, we have agreed a way of responding to such situations for the downstream countries.
In our 2 days talks, I can assure you it was a very successful meeting. Based on a schedule we have laid down, starting next week, legal experts will start working on a legal framework of agreement based on a preliminary technical agreement. We shall meet again here in DC in January 28th and 29th. This will be prepared with a serious consideration of Ethiopia's sovereign benefits, but also with an avoidance of significant harm on the downstream countries.
Well, we now cross over to CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi in Addis Ababa for us, and Yasser Hakim, who is in Cairo for updates. Coletta, let's start with you. Can you tell us more on this statement by the Ethiopian ministers?
Well, Karen, since the end of the Washington DC meeting, what we've seen is Ethiopian officials trying to make the public understand what exactly is happening, because we've seen people taking to social media asking the Minister of Water and Irrigation and asking the Foreign Affairs Ministry to explain exactly the details of what went down in Washington. And part of the explanations we've got from the Minister of Water through his Twitter handle, and he has been answering questions of different citizens personally, he has been telling them that according to the plan, looking at what was agreed in Washington, then filling the dam during the wet season, that's between July and August, is not a bad idea, because he says if they do that by the end of 4 years, they will have achieved at least 84% of production if they go by the water they'll get. But he has also tried to explain that filling of the dam, the major filling will be then between the 2 months, but that does not mean that during the other months, if the water flows, it will not be going into the dam. No, he has said it will be going through the turbines. So there will be continuous production of electricity throughout this time. That has been the major concern. And of course, Ethiopia has to give confidence to its people, because they have contributed to the dam. They have given in their money, they have given in their confidence, and they have given in their support to make sure that the operation of the dam is, it goes on smoothly.
Okay, Coletta. Now over to you, Yasser. Egypt has maintained that a longer period of between 10 and 21 years is preferable. What's been the reaction by Cairo?
Just want to confirm something, that the Egyptian government issued a statement last week after the talks in Addis Ababa, denying that it has called for 10 to 21 years for filling the dam, and it said that the operation for filling the dam should be linked to the amount of water, whether it's a drought season or a flood during that period, and that according to Egyptian studies, the filling of the dam could take up to 7 years. So the 10 to 21 years has been denied by Egypt very clearly in a statement, and Egypt said that 7 years could be from 6 to 7 years, but a maximum 7 years according to the water flow during the time of filling. So what has been agreed upon in Washington seems to be within the range that Egypt has been studying and has been calling for, and therefore is accepted according to the comments by the Egyptian foreign minister and the minister of water resources after returning from Washington, that the meeting has come up with what they see as a comfortable and acceptable deal with Ethiopia and Sudan.
Okay, Yasser. Back to you, Coletta. What is Ethiopia doing to allay Egypt's fears that the dam will worsen Cairo's water shortage crisis?
Well, according to the Ethiopian government, it says that it showed what you would term as goodwill from the onset by accepting to go to the table with Egypt and accepting to listen to Egypt and accepting to compromise to some extent. And it says that, the fact that it also agreed to the Washington talks, because remember, these were talks that were requested by Egypt to the US government. The fact that the Ethiopian government went for these talks and is still in the process of going for more talks with Egypt and Sudan on the issue, it says that this is a show of goodwill and also assure that it is ready to continue acting in a legal manner. And it hopes that when they meet in Washington on 28th and 29th, they'll be able to put pen to paper issues that are legally binding and issues that that allow flexibility. For example, it is not a given deal that the July to August months will be the best for Ethiopia to fill the dam. There could be, climate change or effects that need to be mitigated. And Ethiopia is saying that they are willing to comply on that and ensure that they act on the Nile responsibly while considering the downstream countries. So Ethiopia is saying that it's ready to continue with talks. It's ready to continue doing what will not harm the countries downstream. And it believes that's a show of confidence and a show of goodwill for Egypt.
Okay, thank you, Coletta. Now back to you, Yasser. According to the deal reached in the United States, the dam will be filled in stages. Is Egypt satisfied with the guarantees given by Ethiopia on the amount of water to be released during periods of drought?
Well, according to the statement from the team that has been in Washington, yes, there are agreements over the principles that have been set out in Washington talks, and that Egypt accepts these principles. And just like what Coletta said, on the 28th and 29th, the teams will meet again, the three countries, to hammer out the details of these principles and how to move on concerning the operation of the dam and also the filling of the dam, especially during different periods of the year, and how, if any differences come up between the three parties in the future, how these differences could be solved through some kind of a mechanism that will be binding for the three of them. And therefore, what's remaining is just to put down the details on paper to ensure that the three sides will not be harmed by the dam, and that it will be a source of development for Ethiopia, Sudan, and without harming the water flow or Egypt's share of the River Nile. So far, after the Washington talks, the reaction from the government in Egypt is one of confidence and optimism, if you may say, that the deal will end up on a good note at the end of the month.
Okay, thank you very much for that update. That was CGTN's Yasser Hakim there in Cairo. And of course, earlier we spoke to CGTN's Coletta Wanjoy in Addis Ababa for us. Moving on to other news, German Chancellor Angela Merkel has welcomed General Khalifa Haftar's willingness to stick to a ceasefire. Berlin is set to host a summit on the Libyan conflict. both rival Libyan camps. Other countries and the UN will be there. The summit looks to implement once again an arms embargo. Multiple countries have been accused of breaking a previously established UN arms embargo. Since April, militias loyal to Haftar have been fighting the Government of National Accord, or GNA, for control of Tripoli. The international community remains split, with various countries supporting opposing sides.
Our foreign minister met with General Haftar, and it is a good message that he's willing to keep to the ceasefire. That's the prerequisite. At the Libya conference, we must above all see that the weapons embargo is adhered to again.
Well, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov also weighed in on what Russia hopes ahead of the Berlin conference.
The most important thing now is that after the Berlin conference, if everything goes as planned and the Security Council supports the conclusions from the Berlin conference, the main thing is for the Libyan sides to not repeat their own past mistakes and start adding any additional conditions and blaming each other. As of now, the relationships between them are very strained, and they don't even want to be in the same room, let alone speak or meet each other.
Well, the Libyan people have borne the brunt of the 9-month-long conflict. The fighting has displaced around 140,000 people. Here are some hopes for the Berlin conference.
We hope, God willing, at the conference on Sunday, that God will unite their word and they will reach an agreement so I can return to my home.
I hope and I predict that just as their officials in countries will respect their peoples, we too will have Libyans who will do the same.
Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has inaugurated Egypt's newest military base, the biggest on the Red Sea. The Bernice military base enhances Egypt's geographical reach in the region. It's a comprehensive naval, air force and ground troop station quite close to the border with Sudan. Here's Adel El-Mahrouhi with more.
Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has invited regional leaders and defense officials to witness a new military achievement. The Bernice military base, which Cairo says is the biggest of its kind in the Red Sea. Near the southern border with Sudan, the new base gives Egypt extended reach into Africa and the Gulf region.
To understand the significance of the Bernice base, we must go back 40 years ago, when President al-Sadat got from many big countries offers to establish a military base there. He refused foreign presence, but their demand to that location reflects the significance of the base in the middle of the Red Sea.
The massive ceremony organized, which included the biggest Air Force show in Egypt's history, reflect the importance of its addition to the country. Bernice military base has been constructed in only 1 year. It is built over 150,000 acres of land, providing all forms of military hardware maintenance and health care. It is built to be self-sustainable.
Having permanent Egyptian forces in that region saves a lot of mobilization time and costs. There are naval, air forces and ground troops there, which protect threats from terrorism, proxy wars, and more importantly, it protects the Egyptian territorial waters in the Red Sea, which in 2016, Egypt and Saudi Arabia had drawn. They extend to 130 kilometers in the Red Sea, and soon oil exploration missions will launch. All of that makes the base a great addition to Egypt.
More expansions are currently underway in this new facility. Soon it will include military naval ports of 1.2 kilometers length and 17 meters in depth to accommodate Egypt's latest addition of helicopter carriers and frigates.
Cairo insists that the military base is not to threaten any country in the region. It has been rather established to maintain security in the maritime trade route in the Red Sea. Bernice is the second military base President el-Sisi inaugurates since he took office. Adel El-Mahrouhi, CGTN, Cairo.
We are going to a short break now. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including Senegal has a new rape law, but is it too late for victims? And we take a look at how Nigeria is dealing with fake drugs crisis.
Kwa majina naitwa Bernard Ngige, mimi sukuma namba 3.
Kwa majina naitwa Dennis Muraguri. From tu kitambo nimekuwa tu fascinated na matatu.
Ile mathiri napeleka saizi inaitwa Android. Ile si ati ni siri, ni Rongai 1.
Ni ka story ya mathiri, a day na matatu's life. Hiyo spirit ya manyanga yezi isha.
Any job ya mathiri as a matter of fact, sidhani kama kuna job ingine ambayo imeemploy watu wengi kama mathiri.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Chinese President Xi Jinping arrived in Naypyidaw on Friday for a state visit to Myanmar. It's President Xi's first overseas trip this year and the first visit to the Asian neighbour by a Chinese president after an interval of 19 years. CGTN's Zhu Dan has more from Myanmar.
The Chinese president attended a welcoming ceremony held by Myanmar President Wu Wenmin on Friday. Expressing his goodwill towards the government and people in Myanmar, President Xi pointed out that the two countries, linked by mountains and rivers, share deep friendship. Over the past 7 decades since bilateral diplomatic ties were established, China and Myanmar have developed their bonds on the basis of 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, which they both agreed on. President Xi also spoke highly of the achievements that have been made thanks to cooperation and exchanges in various areas. And the president called for bilateral ties to be pushed forward into a new era with deeper communication and closer strategic cooperation. China is Myanmar's largest trading partner. Their total bilateral trade volume in 2019 was worth $17.7 billion. Meanwhile, Myanmar is active in China's Belt and Road Initiative. One of the biggest projects under the framework is the China-Myanmar Economic Corridor. The country's Minister of Commerce, Dan Ming, said he expected to see continuous growth in bilateral trade, with both countries importing more from each other. And there will be growing investment from China in Myanmar in a broad range of sectors, including transportation and electricity, of which Myanmar is in great need. As local media put it, Chinese President Xi Jinping's visit, laden with investment pledges worth billions, could help reshape the country's economy. Zhu Dan, CGTN, Naypyidaw, Myanmar.
Well, after the welcoming ceremony held by Myanmar President U Win Mint, Xi Jinping also met with State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi. They agreed to hold more talks on Saturday to discuss China-Myanmar relations and other areas of concern to both sides. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi also joined the meeting. Meanwhile, China has told the United States to adhere to its commitment to the One China principle, which states there is only one China and Taiwan is a part of China. The Foreign Ministry was responding to reports of an American warship crossing through the Taiwan Strait.
China closely watched and followed the entire journey of the US warship as it crossed the Taiwan Strait. The Taiwan issue is about China's sovereignty and territorial integrity and is one of the most important and most sensitive issues in China-US relations. We urge the US to abide by the One China principle and the 3 Sino-US joint communiques and carefully, appropriately deal with the Taiwan issue in a way that doesn't undermine China-US relations or peace and stability in the Taiwan Straits.
40% of medicines sold in Africa are either fake or substandard. The World Health Organization adds that 900,000 Africans die every year due to fake or faulty drugs. The problem is prevalent in Nigeria, the most populous nation on the continent. Experts are calling on the government to put in the right measures to tackle this issue. CGTN's Philahasa has more.
The circulation of fake and untested drugs on the streets of Nigeria is rising. This despite government efforts to combat a growing trend for many years.
Experts say one of the major challenges in the fight against counterfeit drugs in Nigeria is the difficulty in differentiating the genuine products from the fakes. Consumers often buy fake drugs thinking they're getting the real thing.
According to the World Health Organization, over 900,000 people in Africa die as a result of taking counterfeit drugs each year. With its population of nearly 200 million people, Nigeria is particularly at risk. The National Agency for Food and Drug Administration and Control, NAFDAC, destroyed fake drugs across the country worth $13 million in 2018 alone. These kinds of drugs, experts say, have an enormous impact on the health of consumers.
Fake drugs are not properly manufactured. You find out they may contain toxic or not so good impurities that will be harmful, can be carcinogenic, causing cancer to people that take it for other reasons. A tablet may have an overdosage of a particular item to a toxic level. So the bad effect ranges from disability to death and so forth.
President Muhammadu Buhari closed the country's borders in August last year to curb the proliferation of counterfeit products, including fake drugs. However, certified vendors in Nigeria say it's time for the government to step up its measures in regulating sales and distribution of drugs in the country.
The best way to get across this problem is to control drug distribution, discourage open drug market, which is the major portal for distributing drugs in Nigeria. Getting a central drug distribution system, national distribution system, state distribution, then to the province and the individual shops of pharmaceutical premises and hospitals can lift their drugs from the province where they find themselves.
For now, purchasing and verifying drugs from only accredited outlets could be the only hope for consumers in Nigeria. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
The Me Too movement has inspired victims of sexual abuse to share their stories, and in Senegal they have passed a new law against rape that may have come too late for victims but brings hope to millions of women. CGTN's Astatal has more.
For over 50 years, rape was not criminalized in Senegal. Instead, its culprits were charged with a misdemeanor. In January, the country's parliament voted unanimously to criminalize rape. Since 2008, Mona Chasario has been running a shelter for victims of abuse, rape, forced marriages, and other trauma. For her, the change was a long time coming.
For some years now, I feel women have wanted to stand up to say stop. Because before there was the sutura law, meaning we stay silent so we don't tell. When they used to bring us a girl who's been raped, we had to hide everything, but now we feel that's it. They express themselves, they tell, they know it's not right.
Victims of rape can face backlash for speaking out in Senegal. Their children are often rejected by the family.
It's really hard to suffer a sexual assault, but it's even harder to suffer a sexual assault which ends in a pregnancy. I was really traumatized. I did not want to live anymore.
Those charged with rape will now face a maximum sentence of life in prison. Astatal, CGTN.
The International Organization for Migration says it has this week assisted 700 South Sudanese refugees in Ethiopia with onward transportation to refugee camps in Asosa, western Ethiopia. They were moved from a reception centre in Gambela in the southwestern part of the country where they'd been accommodated since July 2019. Coletta Wanjoy reports now from Addis Ababa.
The UN Refugee Agency UNHCR says a significant number of refugees continues to arrive in Gambela, western Ethiopia, which sits at the border between South Sudan and Ethiopia. The region hosts over 400,000 South Sudan refugees since 2013 when the conflict in South Sudan began. The International Organization for Migration says severe food insecurity and renewed armed conflict is worsening the already dire humanitarian situation in South Sudan. However, the Gambela regional government has officially communicated that they will no longer accommodate more refugees. The refugees in the region are more than the local population. The region says all relocations will be to a camp in western Ethiopia established in April 2017. IOM says there has been an upsurge of arrivals with over 4,000 refugees, including unaccompanied or separated minors, arriving at Gambela, Ethiopia, South Sudan border for assistance since November 2019. Peace is yet to return to South Sudan. The warring factions have less than 50 days to honor an agreement to form a transitional government of national unity. However, there is concern from the international community that little progress has been made. Colette Wanjohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
1 in 3 women the world over suffers domestic violence at the hands of a partner or somebody else. Ghana is no exception, and women's groups have been calling for changes in the way women are treated. Despite efforts, domestic violence survivors say that they struggle to gain access to the justice system in Ghana, as CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai now reports.
Agnes Mensah is a domestic worker in Accra. She says she suffered sexual abuse at the hands of different employers over the years, forcing her to change jobs several times.
I got pregnant after being raped by my employer. I had to abort the pregnancy.
And yet, Mensah says she never had the courage to report the case. In Ghana, over 71% of women have experienced violence in their lifetime, according to the Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection. Esther Kosi is a domestic worker who is also working to get justice for victims and survivors.
They can't speak for themselves. They are ignorant of their rights and responsibilities. That is the whole problem, because they are afraid.
She says there is a need to raise awareness. Some survivors of domestic violence find it difficult to pay for legal fees in order to get justice. For others, there is also a cultural belief that domestic and sexual violence is a private matter that should be addressed outside of the criminal justice system. This means many cases go unreported. Ghana passed a comprehensive Domestic Violence Act in 2007 to protect women and punish offenders. There is also a fund to provide free medical care to victims. But some women's rights activists say it is being poorly implemented.
The Domestic Violence Fund is a provision in the Act, which we believe that if it's fully implemented and rolled out fully, it will address some of the challenges the victims, survivors face in terms of maybe getting money to pay for medical reports.
The government says it is putting the right structures in place to uphold the law. Agnes Mensah says she hopes that happens soon, so other women will not have to endure the violence she and other survivors have experienced. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Well, let's now go to Ucha for all the latest business news. Over to you.
Thank you, Karen. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. Kenya now opts for World Bank funding to plug its budget deficit. And South Africa's Treasury struggles to find the $140 million to rescue the national carrier.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Well, Let's start off in Kenya. The country is in advanced talks with the World Bank for a loan of up to $991.5 million. The loan is expected to fund nearly half of this year's budget. The East African nation wants to cut debt from overseas capital markets. Now, the government has been on a borrowing binge in recent years, which included Eurobond offers and syndicated commercial loans. The World Bank is seen as one of the viable alternatives to commercial debt. Currently, the lender has multiple development funding programs with Kenya worth billions of dollars. Last year, for the first time, the bank lent money straight to the Kenyan Finance Ministry. This was a change from past practices where it channeled cash straight to projects. Now, the World Bank loan will be cheaper than commercial debt, in line with the government's policy of cutting its funding costs. Meanwhile, time is running out for South African Airlines. This as the National Treasury struggles to find the $140 million which it needs to keep the national carrier in the black and operational. That money is due before the end of January. Tito Mboweni, the country's finance minister, spoke at a briefing session in Johannesburg. He confirmed that Eskom will be assisted, but he wouldn't be drawn on his position on South African Airlines.
The situation at SAA remains critical, with National Treasury officials in meetings with airline management, the business rescue practitioner and the banks earlier in the week. This in an attempt to find that additional funding.
Let's keep our fingers crossed. I suspect I'll be on Swiss International when I go to Zurich on Sunday. You can make whatever conclusion from that.
As the country edges closer to the national budget speech at the end of February, Mboweni is concerned about several other challenges facing the fiscus. Amongst them are some of the state-owned entities and their viability.
Those state-owned enterprises which function very well will require our support, because they should be able to demonstrate that they have a revenue stream which is sustainable and can sustain the business. But those which don't have a revenue stream that can sustain the business must ask themselves about their existence.
Mboweni says another threat to the fiscal position is wastage and corruption. He didn't pull any punches.
Wherever there are large projects, watch out for corruption. Huge amounts of money, thieves, rats and mice thrive. So we must be vigilant about it. Otherwise, this poses a huge threat to our fiscal position.
As South Africa enters that critical period just before the national budget, and then we're going to hear from the last remaining ratings agency, there's some issues that are occupying the finance minister's mind, and they're going to be dealt with. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now, Business Unity South Africa has hosted its second Business Economic Indaba in Sandton, Johannesburg. During the meeting, the business lobby urged President Cyril Ramaphosa to grab the bull by the horns and take decisive action in dealing with the challenges which are facing the economy. CGTN's Yolisa Njamela was there and brings us the following report.
South Africa finds itself requiring bold and decisive leadership that will not make everyone happy. That's according to Business Unity South Africa, or BUSA. BUSA is currently holding a business indaba or gathering in Sandton. Over 400 delegates at the BUSA Indaba joined the gathering to highlight a range of critical steps needed to salvage and revive the country's economy. One of the critical issues is the crisis faced by Eskom. Eskom is a South African electricity public utility. The utility has been a bane of the economy and has caused distress for the business community by failing to ensure a stable supply of electricity in recent years.
What we need to do, government, business, and civil society, is create a single, long-term, comprehensive energy plan that is within the direct control of the presidency, which will unlock the potential of the private sector, of communities, and of households to generate and distribute the power they so urgently need.
This indaba takes place at a time when South Africa is grappling with low economic growth, high unemployment, and a power crisis. Small business enterprises were highlighted here as entities that cannot be ignored because of their contribution to the growth of the economy.
Between business and government, we can work together in supporting of SMEs in the industry. We could also work together in the sound implementation of policy and regulations, because members felt that sometimes it's not so much so about policy uncertainty, it's also about the lack of implementation and the proper implementation of existing policy.
The stagnant economy is putting a strain on all sectors, with retail and mining bleeding jobs. President Cyril Ramaphosa acknowledged all the challenges that the country faces in terms of the urgent need for economic reforms, but he also cautioned that if the structural economic issues are not dealt with, South Africa will be on the same path for a long time to come.
If we are going to build an inclusive economy, we therefore need to restructure our economy, because the current state of our economy is not well aligned with where we want to go. And the sooner we're able to settle down and begin to deal with that reality, the better.
The president committed here to hold monthly meetings with labor and business to continue to seek solutions. Yulison Jamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, let's head to Egypt now, where the central bank has left lending rates unchanged at 12.25%. This is despite expectations that the Monetary Policy Committee would have cut the rates. The bank called the annual headline urban inflation that remained at 7.1% in December 2019 compared to 3.6% in November 2019. Now, during the second quarter of 2019, available data showed that private domestic demand outpaced net exports as the main driver of economic activity. The CBE asserted that the MPC closely monitors all economic developments and will not hesitate to resume its easing cycle subject to further moderation of inflationary pressure. Now, the Reserve Bank cut rates by a combined 350 basis points during the last 3 consecutive meetings and 100 basis points in February 2019. Moving on now, China's economic performance was closely watched as, of course, the China-US trade war played out over the course of 2019. How did China fare while contending with stiff tariffs and a variety of other geopolitical tensions last year? While Xuan Qin breaks down the figures for us.
China reported 6.1% GDP growth in 2019. The rate was the slowest in decades, but China is now growing at a much bigger base. The country's GDP reached 99 trillion yuan this year. That was almost 3 times the amount from 10 years ago. The incremental GDP volume is actually much larger. China's economy hit a milestone in 2019 as GDP per capita exceeded $10,000 for the first time. Why does it matter? GDP per capita represents the output attributed to each individual person. It is a more useful metric for gauging a country's prosperity. Higher per capita GDP is usually associated with higher level of wages. So a rising GDP per capita usually means greater consumption power for the Chinese people. That is key to China's transformation to a consumption-led economy. However, it also raises concerns that China is nearing the so-called middle-income trap. Other key indicators include industrial production up by 5.7%. It gathered steam at the year-end as the nearing China-US trade deal improved business confidence. Fixed asset investment grew 5.4%, a slight improvement on the 5.2% growth reported in November. And that came at a government move to boost infrastructure spending to shore up the economy. Investment in the high-tech sector recorded 17.3% growth, underlying China's efforts for higher quality growth. Retail sales rose 8%, a key indicator of consumption. Retail held steady, but was down from 9% in 2018 amid the China-US trade war.
Now, we all know that a company's brand name and how that directly impacts its bottom line is critical. Well, a company in Mexico has now decided to lean into the controversial legacy of cartel kingpin Joaquin El Chapo Guzman by naming their beer after him. El Chapo is currently in U.S. custody after receiving a life sentence for drug trafficking offenses in July 2019. Now, although reviled by some, Guzman is admired by others in Mexico for having built a billion-dollar drug empire.
Have a cold one. Have an El Chapo beer. That is the message that a Mexican artisanal brewery wants to give drinkers with the launch of a beer dedicated to the infamous cartel kingpin Joaquin El Chapo Guzman.
Es una cerveza artesanal.
This is an artisanal beer with 4% alcohol. This prototype is a lager and it's made up of malt, rice and honey, so it's good. And the idea is for it to be sold in bars that stock artesian beer.
Y la idea es que se venda en cervecerías.
And moving away from the brand 701, it is going to be priced at 70 pesos and 10 cents, approximately $3 US.
Esto va a estar aproximadamente en.
The beer is part of the El Chapo 701 brand, a company owned by his daughter Alejandrina Guzman and inspired by her father. The company has already released a clothing line and hopes the beer will get the green light from authorities to go on sale in bars across the country and beyond. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz, but ahead on Global Business Africa, we'll head to Egypt, where investors sign deals worth billions of dollars at the East Mediterranean Gas Forum. Of course, all that coming up top of the hour. For now, back to you, Karen.
Thank you very much, Ocho. Well, we've got all the sports news coming up for you after the break, including heavyweight champion Anthony Joshua's success inspires Nigeria boxing renaissance.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Boxing is a pioneer sport in Nigeria that predates the nation's independence. Having declined in popularity for decades, the sport is now gradually gathering momentum following the success of Nigerian-born world heavyweight champion Anthony Joshua. CG10's Kelechi Emekalam reports on how the country is producing the next generation of champions.
Dozens of youngsters endure intense training sessions at this beach boxing academy. Trainers are keen on grassroots boxing development, mainly for young budding talents from across the country. The club's mantra is to catch them young. Led by former Nigerian boxer Moses Itua, the academy scouts the young talents, develops their boxing skills, while encouraging them to pursue an education.
Even though we're talking about boxing, we still keep on preaching to the students about education as well. Because mostly in our own Itua boxing club, we try to make sure most of the students are going to school. Even after our program from the beach, most of the presents given to the children are their pen, books, something to develop their studies.
Training at the beach. In fact, it's not easy. I always tell all my guys, without pains, there's no gain.
Current exploits by Nigerian-born world boxing champion Anthony Joshua has raised a passion for the combat sports in many young people here. In spite of intense training schedules, many are already building big career dreams around the sports.
I love boxing, so I would like to train with this boxing club
so that I can be one of the greatest boxers in the nearest future.
Nigeria's boxing was made very popular since the 1950s, but after disappearing from the radar for several decades, it made a comeback in the 2000s and has since produced world champions like Anthony Joshua, Samuel Peter and several others. So trainers here and other enthusiasts are looking to make this sport prominent again in the country. Kelechi Amekalam, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Athletics Kenya has admitted that some of the country's top athletes are running away from doping control officials. Speaking to the press on Friday, AK President, retired Lieutenant General Jackson Tuwe, has warned the athletes concerned their days are numbered, urging those involved in subverting the anti-doping process to quit the sport. Tuwe was reacting to the bombshell reports in the past week where the country's notable runners, former world marathon record holder Wilson Kipsang and Rio 2016 Olympics men 800 meters finalists Alfred Kipketer were suspended by the Athletics Integrity Unit for violating the whereabouts rule. Both have been charged with anti-doping rules violations and are ineligible to compete until their cases are heard and determined by the AIU.
Athletes should know that with the kind of machinery we have to fight doping, there is nowhere anyone can hide for them, and it is either they work hand in hand and remain clean and remain relevant in the sport, or hang their spikes altogether, because the anti-doping winds are too strong for those who want to engage in hide and seek.
Eliud Kipchoge and Kenenisa Bekele, the only men to run the marathon in under 2 hours and 2 minutes, will go head-to-head at the 2020 London Marathon set for the 26th of April. On Friday, organisers confirmed that Ethiopian Bekele would run in the World Marathon Majors event in the British capital after the earlier announcement that Kipchoge of Kenya would return to defend his title. Also in contention will be Mosinet Geremu, Mule Wasihun and Shura Kitata, the Ethiopian trio who finished second, third and fourth last year. It is, however, the showdown between Bekele and Kipchoge that will steal the headlines between two men with a legitimate claim to be the greatest marathoner ever title. The 2020 Handball Men's African Championships, also known as African Cup of Nations, has kicked off in Tunisia, with